Our Story, coming out in the time of HIV and AIDS. This is a story of friendship, love, loss, and drag told with humor and compassion. In 1977, the author, then a naive young man, escapes his pulp and paper mill town in northern New Brunswick and goes in search of his gay self. After 2 years studying in Toronto, he moves to Edmonton, begins his career as a prison guard, and timidly comes out into the gay scene. A lasting and sometimes tumultuous friendship develops with Jo, a drag queen, and in the summer of 1982 they move to Vancouver into anticipation of fun times and promising futures. Their world changes when they're swept into the eye of the AIDS storm, a time when testing positive for HIV was considered a death sentence. Written in diary form, this is an unflinching account of Jo from before testing positive for HIV until his death. This is an intimate look at the impact AIDS had on the author's family of gay friends and those around them. So on the cover of the book here, I want you to introduce you to my friend Jo. Jo was a drag queen, loved doing drag. He was also part of a trio called the Waitresses, who were really quite popular in Vancouver during the 80s. Jo tested positive in 1987, and he died in 1994 at the age of 35. This is but one story, my story, among the many stories that make up our story, about a time that was, so we don't forget, so we heal. Summer 1985. As part of a temporary federal contract, Jo got hired on as a junior draftsman. Janice, a young woman in charge of the project, required an assistant. She interviewed 2 candidates, Jo and a very handsome, fit young man. Janice said she would have loved to have hired the eye candy, but knew he would be too much of a distraction, and instead hired Jo, the obvious gay guy. Jo said for once being an obvious fag finally worked in his favor. Jo and Janice became fast friends, and later we would all become like family. Janice loved that Jo performed in drag, and when they were ahead of schedule on the job, they would often sketch and design dresses that Jo would create and wear in various drag shows and events. There was a store on Main Street with elegant dresses always on display in the window, and every time we drove past, Jo would point at a dress and declare, "Girl, I would look fabulous in that dress." Baby was in the Pride Parade that summer and several more thereafter with the soft top down, and the Waitresses, all dolled up in their tough drag fabulousness, perched up on the back with their sleek legs dangling over the back seat and waving to their fans. The Waitresses became so popular they performed shows all over Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. On July 25th, the world was shocked to see Rock Hudson on TV looking very thin and unrecognizable. It was revealed he was gay and he had AIDS. This would be repeated over and over between gay men and their families. "Hello, I'm gay, I have AIDS, I'm going to die." There was a desperation to find a cure, and gay men offered themselves as human guinea pigs. Too many of them had nothing to lose. I remember an early test some guys on the softball team submitted to, and it involved getting scratched on the upper part of the arm or shoulder. Depending on their reaction, it indicated whether or not they had possibly been exposed to the HIV virus. AIDS was considered a gay disease, and governments were unsympathetic. They offered very little funding or support of any kind. It was politically expedient to let us die. Fighting against bigotry and for our rights and freedoms was nothing new, but fighting for our lives with urgency was. The gay community was no longer willing to lie down and die. Gay men and their allies stepped out from the shadows with a fierceness, strength, and intelligence that would create leaders and heroes out of many ordinary citizens. Spring 1987, a year and a half later. Now that a blood test was available for the HIV virus leading to AIDS, Jo and I gave blood. We no longer had to wait for our health to start deteriorating before finding out that we were HIV positive. After getting tested, there was an agonizing 3-week wait for the results. Prayers were said, fingers were crossed. When Jo and I went back for our test results, sitting in the waiting room and waiting to see the nurse was torture. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to know. I feared that in mere moments my life could change forever and not in a good way. I feared living with a death sentence hanging over my head. Jo and I wished each other good luck. Luck was on my side. I was negative. Jo was not so lucky. He was positive. Jo said being told he was HIV positive was like being hit over the head with a sledgehammer. All he wanted to do was run out of the office, but said he couldn't get his legs to move. I felt horrible for him. There wasn't much I could say except to point out that he was still in good health and he wasn't showing any signs of the virus. Accompanying Jo's HIV diagnosis was an immediate sense of shame, guilt, fear, and depression. As could be expected, Jo was devastated. He lost all interest in sex and he couldn't even get hard to jerk off, he said. May 12, 1988. a year later. Last night, Roger and I had a blast at Denman Station. As usual, we drank, played pool, and had many good laughs. Roger and I have been hanging out a lot over the last several months, and we always enjoy our time together. After leaving the bar and walking back to the car, Roger confided in me that his last HIV test came back positive. That was devastating news. It was too unexpected. I went home and cried an alcohol-induced cry that ended in sobs. It was beyond sad. Roger would later confide in me that he actually tested positive around the same time as Joe, but didn't say anything because he was scared he might be the one who had infected Joe. Joe told me to tell Roger he had a good idea who he got it from, and it wasn't him. September, October 1988, a few months later. I'm spending weekends at the house with Roger. His cold is still hanging on. He isn't looking good and he's lost weight. While he lies on the couch in the living room sleeping in front of the fireplace, I sit at the table on the back porch smoking pot and pecking away up the keyboard on my computer. I'm always writing. Roger's doctor has decided it's time for Roger to start taking AZT, but he has to wait 8 weeks before the pills become available. In the meantime, Roger's health continues to worsen. I moved again. Joe finally got to me. I didn't move out because I was mad at Joe and I still wanted to be his friend. I moved out because I didn't come all the way out west to end up living with my mother. I was done with his picking unnecessary comments. I moved into a one-bedroom suite in an apartment building not far from where Joe and I initially moved into, across from the Mount Pleasant Community Center. Joe moved only 3 blocks away. His apartment was much nicer than mine, with a large balcony facing the North Shore Mountains and a view that spanned from West End to East Vancouver. Joe was peeved at me for moving out on him, but with my apartment having green shag carpet, matching carpets, and a back alley view, it was easier for him to forgive me. But then he'd always been more concerned with being part of the 10% of the 10% crowd than I was. Joe received bad news about his friend and fellow waitress partner, Paul, aka Grandma. Joe said Paul's white blood cell count was way down, and he too has to start taking AZT. I started working out at Gold's Gym and convinced Joe to join with me as well. He called it the Big Boys Gym and was intimidated at first, but relaxed once he realized no one cared if he was queer. One day I arrived at the gym after Joe and watched him knocking off a serious set of reps on the leg press. I chuckled to myself, knowing Joe wasn't much into leg exercises. I had a suspicion of what was going on, so I went up to him, leaned in close, and casually asked if he was planning on wearing a dress soon. Joe laughed. He said I knew him all too well. Indeed, there was an upcoming ball, and he was determined to be sporting some hot gams in his new heels and fabulous new dress. November 1988. Roger's 8-week waiting period for the AZT pills was up, and he had not heard back from his doctor. On Thursday, before the Remembrance Day long weekend, I phoned Roger's doctor. There was no answer, so I left a message asking him to call me back regarding Roger's AZT pills. By the end of the day, he had not returned my call. The following morning, after arriving at the probation office, I called again. This time I spoke with the doctor's receptionist. She apologized for Roger's doctor not getting back to me and said the doctor had already left for the long weekend. I informed her of how sick Roger was and stressed his need for the medication. She apologized again and told me to call back after the long weekend. I remained calm but assertive. I asked her if she could tell me if Roger's pills were in, but she told me she could not disclose that information. I again stressed to her how sick Roger was. The receptionist told me that she sympathized, but again insisted that she could not disclose the information. I remained insistent. The receptionist held her ground, but finally divulged Roger's AZT pills were in. But I couldn't get them from her. I needed to go through the pharmacist at St. Paul's Hospital. I thanked the receptionist for her time and generosity and immediately called the pharmacist at St. Paul's Hospital. Like the receptionist, the pharmacist said she could not disclose any information to me. I told her all I needed to know was whether or not Roger's AZT pills were there. We went through the same loop. No, she couldn't tell me. I remained polite but assertive, knowing if I crossed the slightest line, she could end our conversation at any time. Eventually, she disclosed that Roger's AZT pills were there. Now I needed to know how to get them. She informed me she was the only pharmacist in the city dispensing the medication, and Roger would have to make an appointment to see her. However, she was booked solid and it would take several weeks, if not months, for Roger to get an appointment. That was not good enough. Still polite, I threatened to go to the media if Roger had to wait that long for his possible life-saving meds. I explained he was laying on the couch dying. By the time my conversation ended with the pharmacist, Roger had an appointment to see her on the following Wednesday. If Roger missed an appointment, she said he would go to the bottom of the list. She then directed me to the hospital social worker who provided me information about an organization called People with AIDS, PWA. Through PWA, I was able to connect with a guy who lived in the West End and was collecting AZT from those whose bodies were rejecting the medication. So people like Roger could begin taking AZT while waiting for access to their prescription. Free of charge, the guy supplied me with enough AZT pills to get Roger started, along with instruction on how the pills should be taken. There was a strict regime, and it required Roger to set his alarm clock so he could wake up in the middle of the night and take the pills. Because the Van der Zalm government refused to pay for the AZT medication, the guy said to toss in a request for payment into the garbage. The following Wednesday, when Roger finally saw the pharmacist, she told him she had never spoken with anyone who could be so polite, yet so rude in all the same tone. At first, the AZT pills worked for Roger. He gained weight, he looked healthier. He was finally able to get off the couch and was more than happy to send me packing. He was done listening to the clack, clack, clack of me pounding away at my keyboard. I was happy my good buddy Roger was up and feeling alive again. His spirits picked up considerably and he was able to go back to work. He claimed I saved his life. I did nothing different than what others were doing for their friends and lovers throughout our gay communities. Roger told me he had a needle full of heroin in his night table drawer, and when his time comes, his death would be from a heroin overdose. He said it was the perfect way to go. He also told me that he wanted his ashes spread across the dance floor at the Gandhi Dancer in memory of all the good times that he's had there. As a young man, Roger left home and his family in Montreal because he was gay. Being raised a strict Catholic, he said they'd never approve, so he hitchhiked across the country, landed in Vancouver, came out, and never saw his family again. On occasion, when reminiscing, Roger would get out a photo album and show me photos of his family. He loved and missed his mother the most. Once feeling better, Roger and Ray took a trip home to Montreal. Ray went to visit his aunt who had raised him, and Roger hoped to reconnect with his family for what he knew would be the last time. Ray went with Roger to the family home Roger had grown up in and took photos of Roger standing on the front porch. Roger didn't have it in him to face his family. He felt too ashamed. He didn't have it in him to tell his family he was gay and dying of AIDS. Roger returned to Vancouver without seeing his family ever again. Spring 1990. A year and a bit later. Ray is feeling blue. His new boyfriend Leroy, who is only in his young 20s, is HIV positive. As for Joe, he has a yeast infection inside his mouth called thrush. How can he think it's not AIDS related? There's no feeling healthy or safe once you've tested positive. A group of us went to see the film Longtime Companion. It's the first Hollywood film to deal with AIDS crisis and its effect on the gay community. Amongst the 10 of us who went to the film, only 3 are not HIV positive. Of those who are, some are doing better than others. All we can do is hope a cure is soon on the way. We are tired of watching our friends die off. All levels of government continue to drag their heels on the AIDS crisis and are fine with just letting us die. They need to stop seeing this as a gay disease. The gay community is united and continues to fight. Silence equals death, and play safe are the signs of our time. Right now, condoms and education are the only protection we have against this virus. March 1992, 2 years later. I got the results from my AIDS tests. I prayed to God all the way from home to the doctor's office. By the time I saw the doctor, my stomach was in knots. The results were negative. I do not have HIV. When I told Ben I was still negative, he told me to hold on to it. I would hear this again from others who were HIV positive. Hold on to your negative status. Ray went to Hawaii with his friend Michael, a young man he dated off and on before meeting Leroy. While in Hawaii, Michael became sick and had to be hospitalized. Apparently he's not doing very well. It's AIDS. Joe called. He's down to his 4 helper cells, which he has now called Eeny, Meeny, Miny, and Mo. Humor is the best and unfortunately only medicine. Joe said he had a wonderful time at the Coronation Ball. All went according to plan. He wore glamour drag during the first half of the night, followed by the Swedish stewardesses. Everything was a yoke. Joe thinks he has approximately 6 months to live. He told me that someone who was in the experimental drug trial with him had died. He has thrush in his mouth all the time now, and he's had the shits for the last week. He can't keep anything in. Everything passes through him like water. He remains worried. He was frustrated today. He wanted to go out and let loose last night, but he couldn't be 2 feet away from a toilet. June 20, 1993, 1 year later. Ray picked me up at the airport when I arrived last night. By the time we got to his place, it was time for him to go to bed. He's been running his own company for the past few years, Can-Am Air Conditioning, so he has an early start in the morning. Ray gave me a heads up about how shocked I will be when I see Joe. I woke up early this morning, had a cup of tea, and eventually got ready to walk over to Joe's place. I called first to let him know I was on my way. I had put all negative thoughts about seeing Joe out of my mind. However, on arrival, I approached his apartment building with much trepidation. I had not given any thought of how uncomfortable this might be for Joe or me, or how difficult it might be for him to open his door and allow me in. I thought I would be just happy to see him, and he would be just as happy to see me. I buzzed Joe's suite. It took a bit of time for him to answer. I said, "Hi, it's me." In a weak voice, he said, "Come on up," and buzzed me in. Stepping out of the elevator, knocking on his door, and waiting for Joe to answer was distressing. Mickey and Ray were right. Joe's appearance was shocking. He was a rack of bones wrapped in his burgundy terry cloth housecoat. Joe said, "Scary, eh?" I said, "No, but thin and sickly looking, yes." We moved on to his balcony with its $1 million view. It was a nice enough day. Joe sat with his face to the wind. He said the wind helps him breathe more easily. He said he hadn't heard from his two close friends in the past few months and was very hurt by it. This week he was questioning his worth as a person while on this earth. We talked about it and ended up laughing. He joked, at least he can proudly say, as a man, he got to wear some really pretty dresses. In the end, we agreed that he should be proud. I teared up when he was telling me about his visit with his mom. He smoked pot in front of her. He said at first it felt odd smoking in front of her, but she understood it helped with his pain and appetite. He asked her to smoke pot with him, but she wouldn't. He told his mother what she can do for him is to not let the family refer to him as that fruit who died from that gay disease. He wants her to tell them that he is her gay son who died from AIDS, and it's not a gay disease. He suggested his mother confide in those close to her so she can have support when he passes. She said she had already done so. Joe doesn't want to go home now for a visit because he's looking too thin and sickly. He would rather they remember him the way he was. The only medication he's taken is one pill for the herpes sores that line the inside of his stomach and morphine for the pain. He says he knows exactly when his 4 hours are up and it's time to pop another morphine pill. While sitting on the balcony and smoking pot, we watched two middle-aged Asian ladies going in and coming out of the apartment building across from us. They were moving out or helping someone else move. With each trip out of the building, the two carried armfuls of stuff that they shoved into their parked car. In no time, Joe and I had them pegged as the Asian Thelma and Louise, and what they were packing into the car was everything they were taking with them on their weekend camping trip. We debated which one was Thelma and which one was Louise, but it became obvious when the one lady came out of the building carrying a microwave. She was obviously Thelma, the ditzy one. Who else would take a microwave on a camping trip? The other lady, Louise, came out carrying a child's tricycle. Joe and I decided that was obviously for their quick getaway. Before leaving, Joe wanted me to walk with him the few blocks over to Main Street so he can go to the bank. He was slow-moving and unsteady on his feet. He did his best to hide his frailty. While at the bank, I watched him snap at someone for staring at him. He hated being stared at. After the bank, we started walking back towards his apartment. We moved slow but steady, and halfway there, Joe became irritated with himself. He had wanted to stop in at 7-Eleven to buy a popsicle. The morphine gives him serious dry mouth, and popsicles provide relief. Joe waited on the sidewalk while I hurried back to the 7-Eleven. When I returned, I handed the popsicle over to Joe and immediately knew it was a dumb move on my part. I should have first broken the popsicle in two. Now that Joe had the popsicle, there was no way in hell he was giving it back to me. It was his opportunity to prove to me that he was stronger than he appeared and quite capable of breaking the damn popsicle in half. I had no choice but to stand back and watch Joe put all his strength into breaking that fucking popsicle in two, but couldn't. The popsicle ended up breaking into several pieces and fell onto the ground, except for one small piece that remained on the one stick. Joe stood so vulnerable before me, and in that moment, I sensed he absolutely hated me. Watching Joe wrestle with the frozen popsicle was a flashback moment for me. I was there before with Roger, but instead of a popsicle, it was a child's party balloon. Roger was sick, and I was at his place decorating the house and blowing up balloons for his 40th birthday. Roger sat at the kitchen table watching and decided he would help by blowing up a few balloons. I could still see Roger sitting at the end of the kitchen table, trying with all his might to blow up a balloon. He didn't have the lung power. Man versus kid's party balloon, and kid's party balloon won. It confirmed to Roger how sick he was. He started crying. He became really angry. Here I am, a grown man, and I can't even blow up a fucking kid's balloon. It was a sad and haunting memory, similar to watching Joe wrestle with the popsicle. Joe and I slowly made our way back to the apartment in silence. I figured he had enough for one day. When I was leaving, he demanded his house keys back and made it quite clear to me. And don't you think you're moving in here, Mrs. Hamilton, and taking over, because you're not. I showed him where I had placed his house keys on the counter, gave him a big hug, and told him I'd be back tomorrow. I sensed he hated me even more at that moment, and just wanted to tell me to stay the fuck away. Unlike with Roger, I wasn't going to let Joe keep me at a distance. Not without a fight. June 22nd, 1993. I came back and Joe thankfully let me in. I convinced him to get out of the house and come to a matinee showing of Jurassic Park with Janice and myself. I had already seen it the night before leaving Toronto. When I first suggested it, Joe snapped at me. He already told me he was not going anywhere near the West End. I reminded him the theater was downtown on Granville Street and not in the West End. He reluctantly came along, and of course, we all loved the movie. Afterwards, we went back to Joe's place and had a barbecue on the balcony. Joe tired quickly. It was a big day for him. Janice and I left shortly after cleaning up. I went to the Royal, hung out, and drank 3 beers. That's all it took. I went back to Ray's place and cried thinking about Joe. June 26, 1993. The difference a day makes. Today Joe is off the couch and in a better mood. After lunch I washed the dishes and he dried them. He said yesterday was a bad day and he had wished he was dead. He was annoyed with me about us being at the movie the other day. People he didn't want to see were there, and he had warned me about not wanting to see the West End Queens. I reminded him that he was well liked in the drag community and the waitresses were a respected trio. He had no reason to fear the West End Queens or be ashamed. I asked him what he thought the Queens would say, if he thought their gossip would be nasty or empathetic. He didn't answer. I argued they would have nothing but empathy for him. The Queens get it. They know the scene all too well. Too many in the West End have lost too many friends and lovers already to AIDS. I think Joe got it. That night, Leroy, Mickey, Joe, and I went to see the Tina Turner bio, What's Love Got to Do with It? We all loved it. It was so encouraging seeing Joe up and around. June 27, 1993. One of our first nice days of summer. We smoked pot, ate lunch at Wendy's, and took baby out for a spin with the soft top down. We drove towards the UBC endowment lands and down into the Southlands, always a beautiful scenic drive. While stopped at a red light and waiting for it to change, I looked over at Joe sitting in the passenger seat with his face to the wind, and in that moment, I didn't see HIV, I didn't see AIDS, or sickness. All I saw was my good friend Joe. He saw me looking at him and he asked, "What?" I told him I was seeing him for the first time and not a sickness. And beyond the condition his condition was in, it was still just him. He smiled. "That's right," he said. "It's just little old me, stick boy Joe." He often called himself that. Knowing I saw him and not the disease reassured Joe. In that moment, it felt like any unease between us evaporated and we were back to our usual selves. Then the stoplight turned green. We continued on our drive, with Joe keeping his head up and the face to the breeze. Back at Joe's place, we sat on the balcony and chatted. Joe said he really never knew long-term love. He knows love from his friends and family, but not love and affection from a lover. All is good, though, he said, as you don't miss what you never had. Joe resents his loss of independence. He admitted that's why he dried the dishes yesterday. He still needs to have some control over his life. I told him Roger bounced back from being sick and he can too. He just can't lie on the couch and wait to die. The Joe I know doesn't give up. A few days of lying on the couch and feeling pissed off at the world is okay, but not too many. He said he took a lot of sleeping pills last night and hoped he'd not wake up this morning. I joked he should at least feel well rested. He said he needed it. He confessed that he hated me for coming from Toronto and showing up at his door. He didn't want me seeing him looking the way he does. While sitting on the balcony, Joe pointed out this guy whom he claimed stole parts of his car and said when he feels better, the guy's going to have 4 flat tires. I told him to use that as an incentive to get better. When I left, Joe gave me a long, meaningful embrace. I think I left him feeling a lot safer and maybe a little less scared. Both of us had a fabulous day. Thank you for letting me share my story with you.
I'm with McLaren Housing Society, and I'm a long-term survivor of HIV.
I'm with McLaren Housing Society, and I'm a long-term HIV survivor.
I'm with McLaren Housing Society, and I'm a long-term survivor of HIV.
Hi, I'm with McLaren Housing Society, and I'm a long-term survivor of HIV.
Hello, I'm Kim Stacey, Executive Director of McLaren Housing Society. This World AIDS Day, your donation and support are needed more than ever. In these times of great uncertainty, we need help to maintain our programs, cover increased operating costs, provide emergency support, and most importantly, keep people housed and safe. Donate today at mclarenhousing.org. Thank you.